says this, and he said, peaceably I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So it was when they came that he looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord is anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for the Lord looks for man looks on the outer appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, neither is this one the Lord has chosen. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. And Samuel said to Jesse, are all your younger men here? Then he said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is, maybe pointing out to him, keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes. So he sent for Jesse and brought him. Now he was ruddy, with bright eyes, good looking. And the Lord said, arise, anoint, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. We can look in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose and went to Ramah. Lord, I thank you for your word this morning. Lord, in the next few moments in this place, God, speak to us, God, from your word. Not my lips, not my heart, but God, your heart. Lord, we ask that these words be you. Lord, transform us, penetrate our hearts. God, shape us today in it. We thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this morning I want to talk about being overlooked by man, but chosen by God. Have you ever felt overlooked in your life? Come on. You ever felt overlooked? Like that no one else saw you? Maybe you felt like you were invisible at some point. I think we've all been to the place where we felt overlooked. We've been passed by and other people looked us over, but they didn't choose us. We've been looked over. Overlook means to fail to notice or perceive or even to consider. Fail to notice. Fail to notice. Have you ever been overlooked today? Yeah, or do you feel overlooked this morning? Do you feel, I want to let you know, though you might feel overlooked by man, you are chosen by God. You might be overlooked by people, but you are chosen by God today. I felt overlooked for years. For so much that I felt like, not from God, but maybe from people. You ever felt like people overlooked you? Yeah, we all have, right? Sometimes what it does around us, some things need to change in our life. Maybe I remember talking to a pastor one time. I was in that place and I was leaving, and I said, I'm going to leave. I'm going somewhere else. I'm going to do something else. And he looks at me and he says, well, you'll have to prove yourself. You'll have to prove yourself somewhere else. And see, at that point, I realized that I don't have to prove myself. I allow God to bring the proof. I allow God to work in my life. I allow God to do His part. The proving is not my part, it's God's. It's when we want to release our life to Him. See, it's whose attention we're wanting. We've got to remember whose attention we're wanting. We don't want people's attention, because people's attention will fail us. After a while, they'll get tired of you. After a while, they'll think you need a new haircut or you need a new different attire. After a while, but listen, it's not people's attention that we want. We want God's attention. We want to get God's attention. A lot of times we can get people's attention. It's pretty easy sometimes. We can try to, but that's not what we want. God's attention. No one likes being overlooked. It's not fun. It's not a fun place to be overlooked. You can be discouraged there. We can sit there and we can wonder, why, God? Why not now? Why am I being overlooked? Why is no one looking my way? Why is things not changing? Why is things not this? And we can ask all the whys in our life. But we want the attention of God more than the attention of man. We want God's approval more than the approval of man. And when I'm looking for man's approval, then I've only got it maybe for a window, right? You can lose your approval. But listen, when we have God's attention, and when our heart's directed toward Him, and then He's our heart, He's our focus in our life, He is the one that we want to see. He's the one. See, God is not overlooking you today. He sees you where you're at. No matter where you're at this morning, no matter where you're sitting, no matter where you're living, God knows where you're at. He sees you where you're at. That's a good thing to know, that God sees you where you're at. And He sees you not as who you are, but sees who He's made you to be. See, David was overlooked by his family. David was overlooked by the very ones that gave birth to him. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. He was overlooked by his family. 1 Samuel 16:5. Everyone but David was invited to the sacrifice. Everybody but David. Obviously, the prophet of God doesn't want anything to do with David. Obviously, he's not here to talk to David. I mean, why would anybody want to talk to David? Why? I mean, just put him back out there, put him as far away as we can, that almost you can't even see him. Put him in a distance and just separate. Everybody was there. Everybody but David. He was overlooked by his family. His family disregarded him. They looked at him as just small. They looked at his age and maybe thought, well, his age, he's just too little. He's too young. I mean, he probably wouldn't understand what's going on here today. There's no need to invite him. Samuel definitely doesn't want to talk to David. I'm sure he's here to talk to somebody else. Everybody overlooked David. They didn't even send him, and I can imagine David sitting there far away from everybody else. And I'm sure he knew what was going on. He probably was the one who tried to help put things together. And I'm sure he was maybe sitting back far away and kind of looking at a distance, wondering what was going on down there, and probably seen the smoke coming up from the sacrifice that they made, and wondering what was going on. And there he was by himself, he probably thought. It's just me here again. It's me just tending the sheep. It's me just doing this same old thing. It's me. I don't even know why nobody's even know that I'm even here. They're not even looking at me. They're not paying attention to me. You ever felt that way? You ever felt disregarded? You ever felt overlooked? You ever felt neglected? You ever felt that way? And I'm sure David was not meeting the expectations that he needed to meet in his family maybe. He didn't look like his older brother. Maybe he wasn't as tall as him. He wasn't as handsome as his older brother. Maybe he wasn't as strong. And they didn't see what David was going through in his life. They didn't see all the things that he had to go through. They didn't see all the lions that he faced. And they didn't see him kill the bear, nor did he see him kill the lion. They didn't see all those things. You see, he was concerned about what others thought of him. You ever been concerned what others think of you? What do they think of me? I'm sure he thought, I'm so immature, I'm not strong enough. Maybe what he thought about himself. See, when we look at our life and we look at things going on in our life and we wonder and we start feeling overlooked, we start to question who we are. Maybe he thought, maybe I need to be more like my older brother. Maybe I need to be like somebody else. Maybe I don't need to be me, because maybe me's the problem. Maybe me's the issue. Maybe that's why I'm out here. And it wasn't that David wasn't the issue. David wasn't the issue. See, God was working on David out in the pasture fields. God was working in his life even though he didn't see it, and though God was shaping him and making him into who he wanted him to be. I'm sure maybe his dad came, you need to be more like your older brother. You need to put that harp away, David. It's all you want to do is sit around and play the harp. All you want to do is sit around here and sing. All you want to do, there's things that needs to be done. You're just going to be left with the sheep. I'm just going to leave you out here because all you want to do is play your harp. All you want to do is sing. All you want to do is this. Come on. See, he didn't see what was going on. No one saw everything that was going on in David's life. See, don't change to meet people's expectations. Change to meet God's expectations. Don't change to meet people's expectations, because you'll do that the rest of your life. You'll be exhausted. But to try to get the approval of people. But we need and want the approval of God. That's the kind of change in our life. What are others saying about? What is everybody else looking for? Then I might look more like them, or I might need to change then, because I'm maybe not what they're looking for. Maybe I need to look a little bit different. See, you are who God made you to be. You're wired the way that you're wired. You're who God made. Oh, there might be some things that need to be changed in our life. Maybe He needs to do some shaping continually in our life and change our thoughts and our attitudes. He's still working on us, but He's who He made you to be. Amen. Back to Samuel. See, I'm thankful that God doesn't see what others see, but He sees what others don't see. God doesn't look at us the way everybody else looks at us. God's not looking on the outside. He's not looking at everybody else and going, He's not looking like we do. We look at people's outward appearances. We look at their giftings. We look at everything else about Him. But God looks at our heart. I'm thankful that God sees what others don't. God saw David in the shepherd field, fighting the lion, fighting the bear. He saw him out there worshiping Him. He saw him out there alone. But see, David, listen, though sometimes we feel overlooked, you're not forgotten. You're not forgotten today. You're not forgotten by God. Oh, you might feel like you're forgotten. You might go through rough places in your life where you feel that God has totally forgot about you. Because He maybe didn't answer a prayer like that you wanted Him to. It didn't have the outcome that you were expecting, and you feel forgotten. I want to encourage you today, you're not forgotten. You're not forgotten. God knows where you are. He sees where you are today. And I'm thankful that He doesn't look like everybody else looks. 1 Samuel, it says this. So here's Samuel, and he's there, and he's starting to anoint all the people in David's house. And Samuel's looking for the qualifications based off Saul. Right? He's looking at, Saul, he was handsome. He was the bachelor of Israel. He was more handsome than any man in Israel, the Bible said. He was shoulders and head taller above everybody. I mean, and maybe that's who Samuel was looking for. Maybe Samuel had a thought, I'm looking for another Saul. That's what I'm out here looking for. And he comes and he's got his horn of oil, and he comes up to the first son of David and was like, this has to be the one. This has to be the one. This matches all the qualifications of what Saul was like. See, God wasn't looking for Saul. He was looking for David. He wasn't looking for Abinadab. He wasn't looking for a replica of Saul. He was looking for a David. What God's looking for and what man is looking for is much different. It's much different. What God's idea and what God's qualifications are so much different than what our qualifications are. See, I'm sure Samuel's like, man, yeah, this son here, he's really tall. This has to be him. He's a lot stronger than the rest. This surely has to be the one. And what's God say? God says what? I love what He tells him. And I'm sure he was probably getting ready to dump the oil on the guy's head. I'm sure he was like, this has to be him. And God stops him and says, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I've refused him. For the Lord doesn't see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. I'm sure he thought, he was sensitive enough to God's voice to hear Him say stop. He was sensitive enough to go, okay, Samuel, you're looking through your own eyes. You're trying to qualify this person based off what you see. But God said, I'm qualifying them based on what you don't see. His heart wasn't ready. His heart wasn't right. So He says, not this one. And I'm sure he passed through the next son and was like, well, maybe it's this one. He's not maybe as strong as the other son. But maybe it was this person. And so, no, this one. The Lord's not chosen this one either. And he moved to the next one, and the Lord's not chosen this one. And he's went through all these different people, and he comes to the end, and he says to Samuel, are all the young men here? Is all of them here? And his dad was like, well, there remains yet to be the youngest. Well, in fact, you probably don't even want him. We didn't invite him. Look, if you look real close, I love this. It says, and there he is, keeping the sheep. I'm sure maybe they were in distance and they looked, see him, he's way over there. I mean, he's over there, he's on that harp like he is all the time. I don't know about this boy. We didn't even invite him because we figured you didn't even want him here. I mean, he's out there, listen, you can faintly hear his harp. You hear him just going on like this all day? He's not like my other kids. He's like none of them else. And Samuel says, what? Go get him and bring him to me. Go get him and bring him to me. See, David didn't meet the qualifications of man, but he met the qualifications of God. See, that's the choice. And if I try to be somebody else, to try to meet the qualifications of man, I'm going to fall apart. But if I try just to be me, who God created in me, and I'll meet the qualifications of what God wants instead of what people want, then I'll be able to step in, and you'll be able to step into what God's called you to be. And not be like somebody else, not try to be somebody else to get other people's approval in your life. Well, if I'm more like them, then maybe I'll get highlighted. Maybe if I do stuff like this, then maybe they'll look at me a little bit more. David didn't meet the qualifications of man, but he met the qualifications of God. Nobody would have chosen David but God. Everybody else would have done the same thing. And I'm sure his brothers, as he walked, oh, look at him, here he comes. I don't even know why they invited him here. He has no place here. Nobody wants him. And I love what happens. Samuel says in verse 12, he says, so now he was ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord spoke to Samuel and said, arise, anoint, for this is the one. This is the one I was choosing. David remained true to himself. David remained who God called him to be, created him to be, and God chose him because he remained who he was. He didn't try to be like his brothers. He remained true to who God called him to be. And if we remain true to who God calls us to be, in the right time, at the right moment, He'll position us to be in the right place, even though others might push you out and say, well, she doesn't meet the qualifications that needed, but God. But God will see us from a distance and says, but I'm still waiting for another one. I'm still waiting for the moment. There he is. There she is. I see her right there. And listen, if we remain true, if we stay steadfast, He'll move us. He'll shift us. If we stay in the field and keep playing and keep worshiping and keep loving Him and keep doing the right things toward God, regardless of what others think. Getting man's attention comes and goes. And they move to the next thing, but getting God's attention and wanting God's blessing, God's favor on our life. That's our heart, and that's what we should strive for. See, people overlooked Him. People disregarded David. His parents, his family, his brothers. But God regarded him as high. God had His eye on him. He desired so much to move David to where He wanted him to be. He actually ended up moving him from the shepherd field to the battlefield. Moved him from the shepherd field to the battlefield. Look at this. David in 1 Samuel 17, his dad sends him to his brothers. We know the story. And he said, now take this grain and these loaves to your brothers and run them up there. He was the first Grubhubber or DoorDasher around. Take this food that way. Go deliver this food. See, somebody could come up with a Christian version of DoorDash and the David Dash. I don't know. But see, David didn't meet the requirements to be a warrior. Man, I mean, he kept striking out. He didn't meet the requirements to be a warrior. He wasn't like his brothers. He wasn't like he was overlooked and he was there at the house, but the three older sons were out to war. But his dad just looked at him and said, all right, look, just go take this to the battlefield. And David moved that day from the shepherd field to the battlefield. He didn't meet the requirements to be a warrior. His brothers did. He shows up here to this big battlefield just in time for Goliath to get out and start blaspheming God and defying the armies of the living God. He came out just in time and David's, who is this guy? Oh, this is the one why we've been sitting here for 40 days. This is the one reason we ain't been able to move, and there's not a man or a king that's able to stand in Goliath's way. And David said, David, oh, well, what do you get for killing this giant? What do you get for, oh, well, you get to marry, you get great riches, and you get to marry the king's daughter. Here's David. He doesn't look like a warrior. He doesn't look like a warrior. He doesn't maybe even sound like a warrior. Everybody would overlook him. His brothers got upset. What are you doing? Right? Come on, you're too young to be here. Yeah, I mean, come on, take your shepherd bag and your staff and your stuff and go on back home, son. Go on back home. See, people were still trying to overlook David while God was shifting him into the place that God wanted him to be. See, you may be going through a place in your life right now that you feel like that no one's noticed you, or everybody's turned their head or to their side of you. But listen, I want you to know that God notices you. He sees you today. You might go, all that I got is a shepherd's bag and some rocks and a sling and a staff, and everybody else has a sword. I don't look much like a warrior. God isn't necessarily looking for a warrior. He's looking for one that will allow him to be used, to allow him to work and move in their life. So David, we know the story, right? He goes to the king, and then the king tries to make him look like a warrior, doesn't he? The king tries to say, okay, well, you don't necessarily look the part. I'm going to try to make you look the part. See, if we're not careful, the king was trying to do his best. The king was trying to do his best to help David. Listen, there might be times where people try their best to help you, to try to make you a little bit better or whatever, but it won't be who God's called you to be. He remained faithful to who he was. He remained faithful to what got him to that place. What got him to that place wasn't him being like everybody else. What got him to the place on the battlefield was that he allowed God to use him and been faithful to God. Remain faithful to him today. And he shows up with these primitive weapons, these weapons of kids. You may think what you have and your giftings are not much. You might look at them compared to everybody else and say, well, I can't speak, I can't sing, I can't do all those things like everybody else. I can't memorize, I can't do as much. And you say, well, all I got is this. All I've got is just some rocks and a staff and a sling. All I've got is this. No wonder everybody has overlooked me. See, God will take what seems inadequate in our life, what we feel like we don't have. He'll anoint the things in our life that we look as less than and use them to be weapons of war for His kingdom. Listen, don't discredit what is in your life. Don't discredit what God has put in your life. It's easy to, isn't it? It's easy to, I can't do that good. I look at everybody else and be, wow. Maybe I should try to lift some weights a little bit. Maybe I should bulk up a little bit, Pastor Gary. Everybody else is looking a little bulkier. Everybody else is doing this. And he tries to do it for a minute, and he's like, this ain't me. This is not who I am. This is not the reason why I'm here. So David takes what God had anointed and strengthened in his life, and he used those of weapons of war to bring down the giant that everybody else was afraid of. No one else could destroy the giant. No one else could take down. Everybody else was scared. I mean, they had the greatest weapons at that time. They had the most powerful things at that time. But they lacked one thing. Listen, everybody else was just waiting for the next person to show up. Who's going to kill the giant? And the most unlikely person, God uses them to defeat the greatest champion that Israel had ever faced, the greatest giant that they ever stood in their life. Listen, God might just use you. God just might very well, and He will use you to help bring down some giants in somebody else's life. You might think what you have seems small, and you might seem what you lack, or maybe what you have and said, this ain't amount to much, but put it in God's hand and watch God work and move in your life. Because He might have you there to tear down some giants in somebody else's life. You might be the David that everybody's waiting on in the battlefield, and they don't even know it. Listen, they're waiting on you. Maybe there's somebody, and in fact, they probably are, that there's somebody waiting on us to step into the position that God has for us and step into who He's called us to be. And I could sit back and go, well, I'm just a shepherd boy. I just have these primitive weapons. I can't do much. But when God anoints them, When God anoints what you have, He will bring you out of the shepherd field and onto the battlefield to slay some giants. To move in your life and to do those things. And what happens? David slays the giant with some rocks and a sling. No wonder Goliath laughed at him. I'd be laughing too. Somebody showed up with some rocks and said they're going to kill me with some rocks. And start slinging some rocks. I think that'd be pretty funny. I mean, I've been like, oh. See, Goliath even laughed. Listen, the enemy may laugh in your face. But when you're on God's side, when you have God going for you, and when God's with you, nothing can be against you. If God be for you, nothing can stand. Nothing can stand against you. And neither could this giant, neither could all these things. And David kills Goliath and cuts his head off. He not only kills him, knocks him down with a rock, he takes the Goliath's own sword and chops Goliath's head off and holds it up. This young shepherd boy, this little boy, this one that doesn't look like a warrior. They just seen God use him in such a dramatic way in his life. No one else could ever do that. No one else would normally do that. Listen, you might show up, you might be, God might use you and use what you have, and He will use what you have to help take down some giants. It may look, everybody on the outside be like, who is this person? I'm sure people are going, who is even this person? Who is this guy? I don't even know who this boy is running out here with these sticks and rocks. I don't even know, no one even knew who he was, but God knew who he was. But God knew who he was. God directed his steps. God ordered his steps. God set him up to move him to the place where He wanted him to be. And I believe if we stay faithful to God, if we stay faithful to God's purpose in our life, He will shift us and continue to move us along. Even though everybody else might overlook us and might not think that we have what it takes. Well, listen, when God's on our side, it makes a difference. It makes a difference. See, you may even have some Sauls overlook you. See, Saul got a little upset about this. Saul didn't like the fanfare that David was getting. I didn't know where this boy out. He's like, oh, this is the guy that was playing music before me. Right? And this is the boy with the harp. Who is this kid? I mean, he just took down the greatest giant, the greatest threat we've ever had. And it says this, 1 Samuel 18. Now when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him with his own. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. See, God shifted him from the shepherd field to the battlefield to the kingdom. There was this moving. David shouldn't have been there, should he? I mean, in all reality, should this little boy been there? No. But God. You may be sitting sometimes in your life and you look back and say, why am I even here? It's because God wanted and shifted you. Because He has a purpose in your life. He has a purpose in which you can only fulfill. He put you on here for purpose, to be released out of your life. Oh, God, I don't meet the qualifications. It ain't about meeting the qualifications of man. It's about meeting the qualifications of God. He was rejected by Saul, but chosen by God. You may have to walk around some Sauls in your life. You may have to deal with some Sauls who one moment they think you're great and the next moment they want to throw a spear at you. And it's how we treat the Sauls. It's what God's looking at, the heart. I mean, here's King Saul, and he started to throw a spear at David, trying to kill him. What's David do? David doesn't grab the spear up and just start bashing Saul. No, David stays faithful to God. It's because of his heart. It was because, even though Saul rejected him, they didn't want him. He didn't want him around because he saw what God was doing in David's life and saw how God was shifting David. And God didn't. Samuel didn't like it. Saul didn't like it. See, there's some keys in our life to overcome being overlooked. Let's listen to this. Some keys in our life from being overlooked. Remain faithful to God, who God called you to be. Remain faithful to God. That can be difficult sometimes, right? It can be difficult. David remained faithful to who God called him to be. Not what others thought he should be or what he should look like. He remained faithful to God, what God had called him to be. He didn't change. He didn't change for everybody else, but he would change for God. He would allow God to change his heart, allow God to work in his life. David didn't meet the requirements of his dad's or his brothers, but he met the requirements of God. He had enough characteristics that God would say, that's my beloved son. Listen, remain faithful to what God's called you to be. Listen to that. Get that in your spirit this morning. Remain faithful to God and to what He's called you to be. Don't try to be Saul. Don't try to be anybody else to try to move yourself there. Allow God to shift you. Allow God to shift you. Allow God to expedite your life and shift you to where He wants you to be. See, man is looking for a Saul, but God is looking for Davids. People looking for the greatest leaders, the strongest leaders, and all the ones with the most talent, the most gifted, the most this, and the most. God's not looking for Sauls. He's looking for Davids. He's looking for worshipers. He's looking for praisers. He's looking for people that seek His face. He's looking for people that run after Him. He's not looking for Sauls that's all about themselves. God's looking for Davids. Acts 13:22 said, after removing Saul, He made David their king. He testified concerning him, I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. He will do everything I want him to do. See, Saul didn't do what God wanted him to do. That's the reason why Saul was rejected. Reason why Saul was moved out. Because Saul didn't obey God. He didn't do what God wanted him to do. And he's found Jesse. He found David, son of Jesse. A man after his own heart. This guy's after my own heart. He wasn't looking for the heart of the king of Israel. He wasn't seeking the heart of all these other. He sought God's heart. And when we seek God's heart and God's pleasure in our life, it will shift us. It will bring a change in our life. And we stop looking for the approval of man and looking for the approval of God. It will bring a change to us. He'll do everything I want Him to. Wow, what thing to be God to say about us. Wow, wouldn't that be awesome that God would say that about us? Man, there's Bill. He'll do everything I ask him to do. There's Miriam. She'll do everything. Man, what a powerful statement by God. God, let us be found faithful. God, that you could say that about us. There they are. They'll do everything I ask them to do. Everything. Gosh. Why? Because God wasn't looking on the outside stuff. God was looking at the heart. Because on the outside we can meet all the expectations and we can look the part and we can do it, but it's the heart that defines who we are. It's the heart. It's the heart that God looks at. It's the motivations of our heart that God looks at. It's what moves us and what shifts us. It's what made David different than all of his other brothers was his heart. It wasn't his abilities. It wasn't the giftings. It's what caught God's attention. God, let us have hearts. God, that'll catch your attention. God, let us have hearts. God, that everybody else might overlook us, but you looked at our heart. You saw our heart. God, give us clean hearts, pure hearts, oh God. How else can we move? And we've got to remain faithful to God and what He's called us to be. And have hearts that respond when God speaks and when God talks to us and when He tells us to move and when He tells us to do. We have to respond to Him. We have to have that kind of heart. Because Why? God looks and sees what others don't see. I'm going to do something a little bit different than I never do this. I've never done this. But as I was preparing this message, I felt like God dropped this in my heart, and I believe it's for this time and for this moment and this season and of our life. And I want us all to be open to receive this. Listen, we're living in a time where Sauls have been rejected and being replaced. Sauls have only done what they wanted to, not what God wanted them to. They've built their own kingdoms instead of God. Saul won't see the hand. Saul will see the hand of God removed from their life, and David will see God's hand upon them. God is raising up a David generation in this moment to be a remnant that God has kept for such a time as this. Man has so overlooked them as not leadership quality that they've not even been recognized when they rise. God is fast tracking them. Oh, take that for you today. These Davids. God's moving Davids from shepherd's fields to battlefield. In fact, people will wonder where they came from and where they are and who they are and what you're even doing here. Your weaponry will be different. Not what everybody else shows up to have, but simply God will use the simplest things to confound the wise. God is raising up some Davids in this time. That giftings doesn't look like everybody else. To those who currently are fighting and too afraid to stand against the giants of their day, God's going to raise up some Davids with some warrior-like instincts that looks like primitive weapons as childs to conquer the giants of our day. But what God has gifted them, He will anoint them. The enemy will even laugh, and though David's emerging, the enemy will look and wonder why even what he's even doing. David will not be concerned, and David will not come and David will come up with the slings and stones. But he will not come just in sticks and stones, but he'll come in the name of the Lord to advance the kingdom in this time, in this moment. Saul will become jealous and try to do his best to keep David from rising up, but God will be with him. But because God has chosen David's at this time, not as man, but God chose. Because He hath chosen them by God. And they've not been chosen by God, they've been chosen by man, but chosen by God. They will be careful how they treat the Sauls. And they still have respect for what God has rejected. The Davids will arise. You will see Davids rise in the church, in businesses, in government, in schools. God is raising up a David generation in this day. Do it, Lord Jesus.